In the future, in the year 2173, when technological sophistication has surrounded human civilization, two scientists find a cryogenic capsule in the forest, which turns out to have been stored for 200 years. They illegally bring the subject in the capsule back to life. He turns out to be a man named Miles Monroe who was only 35 years old when he was frozen. The data card that was inside the capsule details some of his important identities, including information on his past employment as the owner of the Happy Carrot health food restaurant, and a jazz musician playing the clarinet. From his data, it is also known that Miles was originally admitted to St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village for routine surgery for his congenital disease. But complications and mistakes occurred, and Miles never regained consciousness. Then he lay in a coma for some time and accidentally became part of the subject of the cryogenic experiment. When Miles regains consciousness, he is a little dazed and seems to have forgotten how to walk. Two scientists teach him again. But Miles just seems to lose his ability to walk normally. He walks backwards and directionless. When the security officer arrives, Miles is introduced as a scientist who is testing their latest experiment. At first, the officer is suspicious of the activity in the laboratory, especially since Miles is showing very strange behavior. But because the two scientists continue to assure that it is just the effect of the experimental test, the officer believes them and leaves. Two scientists took Miles away from the laboratory in a uniquely shaped future car. The three of them headed to the big mansion to fully recover Miles' condition. The next morning, although he was recovering quickly, he did not realize that he had been asleep for 200 years in a cryogenic capsule. Miles was confused about his own condition. The two scientists who revived him, Melik and Orva, finally told him what really happened. The fact that he had been asleep for 200 years made Miles just pass out. He was in deep shock. He couldn't believe what had happened. He questioned how it was that he, who had intended to have surgery and wake up 5 days later, actually stayed asleep longer than he expected. This can be called a miracle in science and medicine, but Miles didn't accept it. He was anxious in the present world. Of course, he didn't have anyone he knew. His friends had died 200 years ago. His family was also probably the same. Miles is now alone in a world that is very foreign to him, called the Central Parallel of the American Federation, which may have once been known as the Western United States. At least before the war. A war that was triggered by a man named Albert Schenker who held the reins of a nuclear explosive. Melik and Orva are now asking Miles to join them. He will stay at the mansion for 2 weeks and undergo a series of tests. Before their plan for Miles is explained, Miles must continue to hide to avoid government surveillance. Because this illegal act will get them in trouble if caught. Not only the two scientists, but Miles himself will be demolished if their actions are discovered. Destroyed does not mean killed, but they will be brainwashed and simplified their minds using electronic devices. Some memories will disappear from their heads. Miles couldn't believe that the state would commit such a horrific act, especially in such a modern time. But the fact is that it did. Melik and Orva mentioned that there was an underground rebellion movement fighting for revolution and against the government. Their current goal was to overthrow the country's leaders. Miles, instead of getting calmer, gets more agitated by all this information. He gets angry and keeps walking back and forth in the room while pouring out his annoyance. Actually, the annoyance he feels is very natural, because he feels trapped in a situation that is beyond his control. Intending gastric surgery, but instead ended up in a cryogenic capsule. And upon awakening 200 years later, instantly became an illegal and forbidden creature. And if his whereabouts were known, it could make him a fugitive of the state. No human being would want to suffer a fate like Miles. His anxiety was soon stopped by the doctor who tried to calm him down by giving him a cigarette. At first Miles refused because he didn't smoke and he thought the habit was unhealthy. But once Orva said it was just tobacco, Miles strangely took it and smoked.